Did you ever notice that the tighter you hold onto your money, the poorer you feel? Sometimes, the more we save our money, the harder it becomes to actually use it. Years ago, at the edge of a vast desert, lived a prosperous young merchant. He was the wealthiest man in his town, yet the most miserable. Every coin he earned vanished into a heavy iron chest beneath his bed. He wore rags. He ate stale bread. When neighbors invited him to feasts, he refused out of terror. At night, he lay awake with his keys clutched in his fist, haunted by the fear of losing everything. When his father fell ill, the merchant convinced himself that medicine was a luxury he could not afford. He bought cheap herbs instead. Within weeks, his father died. Sitting alone in his quiet house, surrounded by bags of untouched gold, the merchant felt a coldness no fire could warm. Desperate for peace, he walked into the rocky hills to find an old well-keeper, a man who owned almost nothing, yet possessed a light, joyful spirit. "You are starving in the middle of a harvest," the old man said, looking at the merchant's hollow eyes. The merchant wept, confessing his terror of losing what he had saved, and how his obsession had left him completely alone. The well-keeper led him to two ancient stone wells, side by side. He drew water from the first well, pure, sweet, clear. Then he pointed to the second well beside it, locked with a heavy iron lid that had not been opened in years. "Drink," the well-keeper said, offering the fresh water. The merchant drank deeply, his throat parched. For years finally found relief. "Now look at the locked well," the old man said. "That one was sealed many years ago by a man much like you. He was terrified of the water running out, so he locked it away to save it." The merchant walked to the locked well and peered through a crack in the lid. A rank stench rose from the darkness. Below the water was thick green and choked with rot. How, the merchant gasped. How did it spoil? A well stays sweet because water flows out and fresh water flows in, the well-keeper said. Water is meant to give life. When you seal it in the dark, out of fear, it rots. It poisons itself. The merchant stared at the locked well. He understood. His chest of gold was no different. "But if I spend my money," the merchant asked slowly, "won't I eventually run dry?" The well-keeper pointed to the snow-capped mountains in the distance, where water perpetually flowed down. "The mountain spring does not stop flowing just because you take a drink," he said. "Money is not the water. Your vitality, your skills, your mind, that is the spring. Money is merely the bucket. When you hoard the bucket and refuse to drink, you die of thirst beside a full well." The merchant returned home and unlocked his iron chest for the first time in years. He bought nourishing food. That evening, he prepared a meal, simple but real. When his neighbor passed by, he invited him in. They ate together. For the first time in years, the merchant laughed. He watched his own face in the window's reflection and barely recognized the lightness there. He bought a warm wool coat the first morning he wore it. Walking through the market, a stranger greeted him. Then another. People who had forgotten he existed began to see him again. He invested in better tools for his work. With less strain, his hands moved faster. His mind, no longer consumed by fear, began to solve problems he had ignored for years. Every coin spent, seemed to unlock something inside him. The spring was flowing. One winter, a terrible drought hit the valley. The crops failed. Trade stopped. The young man's income completely dried up for 6 months. His neighbors panicked. They hoarded their scraps and fought in the streets. But the young man remained calm. He used his savings to buy grain for the village and support his workers. When the drought passed, the grain he had given returned to him tenfold. The townspeople remembered who had fed them. They rushed to do business with him. His workshops filled with orders. His wealth returned, not as a hoard in a chest, but as a living, flowing thing. The young man returned to the well-keeper one final time, carrying a gift of fresh fruit and bread. The old man smiled and said simply, "Now you know. Abundance is not about holding on to everything out of fear. It is about letting things flow and trusting that the spring will always refill the bucket." In life, your bank account will never tell you that you have enough. Money is a tool that should move, turning into health, experiences, moments with people you love, and growth. But fear whispers a different story. It tells you to lock everything away, to save for a tomorrow that never comes. The people who survived hard times were never the ones with the most locked away. They were the ones who had invested in their skills, their health, and the people around them. They had a spring. So spend on what makes you alive. Spend on learning. Spend on the people who matter. Spend on the moments you will remember. Because true wealth is not measured by what stays hidden. It is measured by how much life you are able to create with what you have. And that spring will never run dry. This is Life Upon a Time Stories. Thank you for watching. And if you are new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe